SoundCartel.
In this episode, we're talking to Eardrum founder Ralph van Dijk. A veteran of audio creation, he discusses the importance for brands to understand the nuances in creating audio so that it resonates best with their audience.
For a brand, if you're talking about branded podcasts, if you're a brand and you can tell a new and interesting story in an authentic way, listeners will love you for it, and they'll love your brand for bringing it to them. So there's a fantastic opportunity.
From SoundCartel, I'm Nick Schildberger, and this is Podcasting Essentials. Welcome to episode 6 of season 4, and welcome to my co-host Nicole Goodman.
G'day Nick, happy to be here again.
Now, it's been a busy couple of months in the wonderful world of podcasting. Did you know that May 2020 saw a record number of podcasts added to Apple Podcasts?
Yes, another fortnight, another million podcasts.
No, well, not quite. There was
quite.
96,500 added in May, which was a record. And the second largest month was actually April, the month before. And that now means that there's a little bit more than 1.1 million podcasts in Apple Podcasts.
That's it. It's been an important and an interesting time for podcasts during COVID-19. I think for a lot of brands and a lot of people, it's been a time to get podcasting happening as part of their marketing plan, which perhaps they may have put on hold or not wanted to pursue as part of their 360-degree marketing offering. But having this lockdown, having the downtime to go, actually, you know what? Podcasting is probably one of the only ways we can now talk to our audience.
It'll be interesting to see whether the podcasts that are starting up now, almost through necessity to communicate with their audience, like, for example, the Melbourne Cricket Club, the Sorrento Sailing Club, places that are closed but have members, they've launched podcasts during this time to communicate. It'll be interesting to see whether some of those podcasts continue when life goes back to some kind of normality. Hopefully they do.
Yeah.
If they've got something of value to keep communicating, then hopefully they realise that audio is a great way to do that. I think for other businesses, though, that are turning to audio right now, they'll realise that, hang on a sec, there's a heap of things we should be doing in audio forever.
Yes.
For example, why do we need to run 12 live events? Maybe we do 6 live and we do 6 as a podcast or a audio on demand version.
Absolutely. I think this time has really shone a light on podcasting more than ever before as a real viable alternative to mainstream media. And it's also cost effective. So while money perhaps hasn't been coming in at the rate prior to COVID, it's a way to speak to your audience in a more cost-effective medium.
Now, speaking of money in podcasting,
yes.
Since we were last in the studio, Spotify has been shopping again, this time purchasing the world's most popular podcast, that's according to Edison Research, and that's the Joe Rogan Experience, for more than $100 million. Now, it's big news in the world of podcasting, but what's it all mean?
Spotify has been out there. Their proclaimed mission, their goal, has been to become the world's biggest podcasting publisher. What a bold move. This is the mission that they're on.
Well, it's a clever way to get a huge audience to be forced to come across to use Spotify to listen to their favourite podcast. And we're talking about millions of listens to Joe Rogan's podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Very smart.
The $100 million is a big figure and potentially over the odds, but they are making it a big play. And it's not the first play. This is their fourth or fifth big acquisition. It was quoted somewhere in social media that you'd be talking about, if comparing it to music, you'd be talking about 20 plus billion streams of music on Spotify, which means that Spotify is in some ways valuing Rogan more than any other musician in the history of music.
Spotify do need to be careful that they don't cannibalise their traditional music track, which has been the foundation of the business so far. So they need to perhaps consider the money that they do get from this acquisition. Do they then farm that back into the music track to see if they can develop their musicians more? It'll be interesting to see what they do.
Very interesting, but we should get to today's interview, which is with a veteran of audio creation and someone who really understands how well-crafted audio can deeply resonate with audiences.
Absolutely, Nick. Look, Ralph van Dijk is creative director of Eardrum. It's a company that he founded 30 years ago in London, and he's world-renowned as an expert in radio, advertising and audio branding. Ralph's won a swag of international awards. He was selected to serve as the jury president at the 60th anniversary of the Cannes Lion Festival. While in lockdown, our very own Chris Ashmore spoke with Ralph, who's lived in Sydney now with his family for 16 years, about the fantastic opportunities audio can offer brands venturing into this new medium. First, though, Chris asks Ralph, what makes a good podcast?
For me, I think the most important ingredient is authenticity, and it's vital in an audio-only medium. And it's also something that we crave, I think, more now than ever. And it's probably why I sold my soul to audio in the first place, those years ago. But hosts and guests that say what they're thinking as opposed to reading a script or an auto cue, and telling stories in ways that excite and intrigue the ear, layered sound design, music that adds to the emotion. These are all elements that go into making great audio content, let alone podcasts. Editing out the preamble and the waffle like you're probably going to do with this conversation. And I guess for a brand, if you're talking about branded podcasts, if you're a brand and you can tell a new and interesting story in an authentic way, listeners will love you for it, and they'll love your brand for bringing it to them. So there's a fantastic opportunity, but to do it well as a brand is so important because you're already setting yourself up by appearing as a branded podcast. People are already going, okay, do I really want to invest 20 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes in a piece of propaganda? No, not really. So you have to really overachieve in order to get a branded podcast across the line and build an audience. So it's not impossible. I mean, we're doing it, but the criteria and the bar is even higher, I think, for a branded podcast.
Absolutely. Well, tell me a bit about yourself, Ralph. You founded Eardrum 30 years ago or so. What's your background and what does Eardrum do?
Eardrum is an advertising agency. Most of what we create is executed in audio. Not everything, but we're working with brands that we're making TV campaigns and digital work and stuff. But most of what we're known for has been work that's ended up in audio. We come up with ideas that are platforms that can be executed in a radio campaign, but also a print campaign, a TV campaign, a digital. So we don't do one-off ads as such. So that's born out of training in an advertising agency where it's driven into you to come up with the big idea. What's the big idea? We may execute that in audio, but the idea itself can be executed on a number of different platforms. So that's what Eardrum does. My background, I started in an agency as a writer in New Zealand and left to travel the world and ended up stopping in London, stopping there for 18 years, initially working in agencies again. And then I set up Eardrum. I could do audio well and I really enjoyed it. And I thought, well, if I could make a living just doing audio, I'd be happy. And now I do, and I am, which is nice. So yeah, was there for 18 years and it was kind of a fluke really that I'd set the agency up at a time where there were only 2 radio stations in London. Can you imagine all those millions of people, only 2 commercial stations?
Incredible.
But within 2 years, the industry deregulated and there were like 18 stations that appeared suddenly, and there was a demand for people who had expertise in writing for the spoken word and casting and directing for the spoken word, and that was something that I knew I loved and I could do well. So as the industry grew, so did we.
Uh-huh. One thing that you need to create with what you do is sonic branding. And for the uninitiated, can you explain what sonic branding is and who needs it and why?
Sure. Sonic branding is where the essence of a brand has been captured in sound. It can be an audio logo, a piece of music like a brand anthem or a brand voice. And a brand that has a sonic asset or sonic assets are then able to utilize all the multitude of audio-only platforms to much better effect and also stand out in kind of visually cluttered environments. So that's really what sonic branding is. There's a huge variation in the quality that's out there. It's not enough to create a sound that just in time becomes associated with a brand. The best sonic branding conveys meaning, and that meaning resonates every time that sound is heard. you will know that most brands tend to only exist visually, even some big famous brands, and they're missing a massive opportunity to reach these growing audiences of people who just love audio entertainment.
What are some good examples of sonic branding?
I think the best way of defining it is like if I ask you to close your eyes now and imagine the sound of McDonald's, you'll hear something, right? You'll hear something in your head.
Yeah.
I'm hoping you would.
Yeah.
Can't see you. And if I asked you to do the same thing with Toyota, you'd probably still hear something.
Right, yep.
Telstra's the same. They all have a sonic that is associated with the brand, and you can hear it in your mind's ear, if you like. But if I ask you to do the same for Vodafone or Burger King or Tesla, massive brands, but they don't have that sonic association. There's nothing that they haven't invested in something consistently for us to be able to conjure up the brand just through something that we hear. So what's great about the ones that we do hear, like McDonald's, is that it's associated with the meaning of positivity. That little ba-da-ba-ba-ba phrase is a positive, upscale piece of music. Toyota, when you hear that da-da-da-da-da, we are thinking of a feeling, that evokes a meaning again. So they've been successful in communicating an emotion just within a few seconds. So that's a great example of sonic branding.
Uh-huh. I mean, we're visual creatures, or we think we are, but audio is just as important to resonate those feelings. And is that kind of it?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so much research that shows the power of audio and music and how it lights up parts of the brain that visual stimulus doesn't. And it's hardwired to our emotions. So to be able to understand that and to be able to harness that for your brand is a really powerful asset. Just reaches our emotions, and our emotions are what dictates so much of our behavior in purchasing.
There's a lot to be said about, even on television these days, news reports and, of course, podcasts where there can be quite rubbish quality audio. A lot of people tend to accept that lower quality. Is it a misunderstanding about why the quality is important, do you think?
At the moment, we're all forgiving the really amateurish sound quality and visuals on our TV news and things like that because we go, okay, well, this is what we're living through. People have been caught on the hop. They don't have the broadcast quality material at their home and they're all self-isolating. So we've been forgiving a lot of that. I think the bigger issue is that some of the quality of writing and ideas in advertising, to me, that's unforgivable because there should be enough expertise and there should be enough understanding of why it's important for an idea to be entertaining, why it's important for the writing to be intelligent. And for some reason in audio, there's an acceptance of substandard creative that doesn't exist in some of the other visual media. And it's partly due to the fact that it's cheaper. It's cheaper to make, cheaper to buy. If audio costs 10 times more to make, I think advertisers would take it a hell of a lot more seriously. There's also, I guess, a lack of skills and experience sometimes within advertising agencies to be able to understand how to write and produce for the spoken word. There's a lack of budgets and marketing strategy within radio networks as well, who are producing a lot of the audio that we hear. Most ad campaigns that I hear on podcasts or on radio stations, I believe are working to half their potential. They might be reaching the right audience, reaching them at the right time, and they may even be saying the right things, but the way they're saying them makes that message so easy to ignore and to forget. And it's just a fundamental lack of understanding of how best to use the medium. And the way creatives are taught is there's a lot more emphasis on what they're doing visually than there is in a lot of the writing skills that are required. So I guess that those things all feed into the lack of quality that I see in sort of ideation.
Can you give an example of, say, what is a good ad and what is not such a good ad?
I guess the starting point for me is just understanding how listeners listen. And audio is an intimate medium. We are leaning in to podcasts and we're engaged in talk radio, music radio, where it's on in the background, but we're listening probably on our own to the station we know and love, and there's a familiarity there. The advertising needs to be sympathetic to that environment, and having a more conversational tone of voice, talking one-to-one, and using the listener's ability to picture scenes, so giving them something memorable to latch onto. People are zoning in and zoning out constantly of audio, so making something interesting on the ear to make them remember the brand and not treating people as if they're idiots by shouting at them and repeating something 10 times just because they feel it's more important or it's going to land more if they just shout. It has the absolute opposite effect. And so much audio advertising I hear just doesn't play on the strengths of the medium, which is that intimacy, or using the listener's ability to imagine things. One of the key learnings I had when I was starting out is the ad that I make should make the listener the co-author. If I can make an ad so that the listener is actually engaged and forming pictures whilst they're engaged with the ad, then I've got them. I mean, I can give you an example now of what I'm talking about. If I was to walk out of the studio I'm in now, walk through the control room and open this door here, and then come downstairs and go through this gate here and walk outside down the stairs, I can see Kent Street just out here, and I'll open this door and this gate here that takes us onto the street, and you're imagining all this. You're imagining this big iron door that clunks, and I'll slam it again, and then I'll walk back upstairs. So you're seeing all of this, and you're hearing my voice change as I'm running up the stairs. And all these things are just visuals that you can really enjoy and form a picture and without having to pay for a camera or anything. So now I'm walking back in the booth, and you're probably wondering why I've gone quiet. But that gives you a bit of an example of why I love audio.
That's fantastic. Now, you mentioned the ads that might not fit the medium. Would it be fair to say if you replicated an ad from radio and just dumped that into a podcast, it kind of defeats the point of the intimacy of podcasting? I suppose the ads in radio are fighting for attention from each other, but within a podcast, it's a lot different. That intimacy is different.
That's right. I mean, it comes down to an understanding of how listeners listen. And we're in different modes and mindsets according to the different platforms. So on radio, your ad has to cut through the clutter of the rest of the ad break. So it has to do more to achieve that attention. But in a podcast, we are already engaged. We're leaning in. We've chosen that podcast. So we don't have to have that cut through at the beginning of the ad, for example. So in a podcast, having a conversational tone of voice, simplicity of message, and assuming a greater degree of intelligence from your audience, I think is a good place to start. That's the difference between a podcast ad and a radio ad. I think still conversational tone of voice is required across all audio, and simplicity of message is also required. But just that cut through isn't as important in a podcast. It's still got to be memorable, still got to be interesting. Yeah, just understanding how listeners listen on those different platforms is vital. And again, on Spotify, it's different again. You're interrupting as an ad, you're interrupting that person's playlist. They've selected it, they've curated it, and now you're interrupting it. So you have to come bearing gifts, either be interesting, be entertaining, or provide something that you know is going to be useful.
We're often told that host-read ads are effective. Are they? What are your thoughts?
Oh, they are. There's no question. They're integrated more seamlessly into the content. They come with the endorsement from a person that you already know and trust on that show. They absolutely work, and that's why it's currently the main form of advertising within a podcast.
Any limitations, though?
Yes, absolutely. I think that a host-read ad will always be borrowed property. So as a brand, you can never own that space. It's always coming via someone else's brand. So the host, for example. If you're Coca-Cola or Toyota or whatever, your branding is secondary to their branding. The other point is that there's going to be a pressure on the inventory within a podcast. There's only so many host-read ads a host can do before they just deem to be a complete sellout, and you lose all the sincerity or authenticity about that endorsement. So recorded ads will see an increase in the number of pre-recorded ads within podcasts just because of the pressure of inventory and a podcast needing to monetize the show. They can't all be done by the host.
Well, it seems like podcasting still has room to grow and the popularity of it seems to continue to grow as well. How do you see the business of podcasting evolving?
I think it's going to continue to go from strength to strength, really. I think that the great thing is for people who make podcasts like you and I, the cream will rise and listeners will become more and more discerning and more demanding. So many of the badly produced shows that maybe they found an audience by being first in their niche, I think they'll be weeded out and they'll either need to step up or risk being taken over by some of the more experienced podcast companies that spread into different subject areas. There are so many nature and science TV shows, for example, but Planet Earth rates the best because it's awesome and it's just the production values and the research and everything that goes into it is just so much better. So I think the standard is going to increase. I mean, obviously we've seen numbers increase, and there's 1 million podcasts. I think that's the number that everyone's using now out there. But I think the quality is now, the next phase is going to be higher quality production and higher caliber of people working on them.
Oh, Ralph, thank you so much. That was awesome. Great insights. Thanks for your time and good luck with Eardrum.
Thanks, Chris.
That was Ralph van Dijk, founder of Eardrum.
Really interesting interview, Nick. One of the things that jumped out for me was the need to really understand the medium. I think a lot of people are quick to assume that audio, it's a much smaller medium, easier to do, nimble, and so there's not much skill involved. It's a very separate industry, a very separate medium that requires a significant skill base and knowledge to do well. So writing for audio in particular is a very different thing to writing for video or if you're writing blogs. Even if you think that you've written a great script, it's only once you start actually voicing it that you go, well, I need to change a few things around. But people that produce audio shouldn't be underestimated because they're in audio. It's highly specialised as an area.
And then taking that to the next level, Ralph spent a lot of time talking about the differences between different types of audio and where it's being listened to and by who and making sure that at all times that you're being creative and imaginative for the audience that you're trying to target.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things about audio is that it does actually trigger your imagination. It's not like anything visual, like video.
Well, you may think that video automatically triggers those emotions because you've got the visual with the sound, but it's not necessarily the case.
No, it's not. With video, you're definitely spoon-feeding your audience. You're telling them what to think, telling them what to see in conjunction with the sound. When you just have audio, the brain, your mind is making up its own mind, its own decisions and creating phenomenal images in your head.
And wasn't it terrific when Ralph left the studio and was leaving pauses and gaps, letting the ambient noise and deliberately slamming doors? You could picture exactly what he was doing and where he was going.
Yes.
Just through listening.
Yeah. And interestingly, even though the sounds sounded logical and it was just going outside and down the stairs, everyone's point of view or how people would have seen that would have been slightly different. So the staircase would have been different, or perhaps it was a sunny day for some and a slightly cloudy day for others. So that just enhances and enriches the experience.
And there are so many ways you can add those sounds as well. It doesn't have to be done at the time of recording. You've got masters of post-production who can add a whole soundscape, and there are so many more things that can be done.
Absolutely. And I think this is really where, for brands and also advertisers, need to get on board with the idea of audio as being an exciting, entertaining medium. So when brands want to educate or to inform an audience, that is well and good. But people are coming to podcasts also to be entertained.
Well, Ralph said he was referring to ads, but he said don't interrupt with an ad. You need to come bearing gifts.
Yes.
And it's the same for branded podcasts as well. I think he did mention that it's potentially harder for a brand to capture the audience with a branded podcast because listeners might be a little bit skeptical when it's coming from a brand that it's going to be very advertorial. But that's where the opportunity is to really, as you were saying, entertain.
If you can add that entertainment component to whatever it is, being the podcast or an ad, you will bring people on the journey with you. And this is such an important point for business people, brands of all sizes. It doesn't just have to be an interview, one-on-one interview. It can be exciting and it doesn't have to be overdone, but you can enhance the podcast by just thinking outside the box just a little bit.
Excellent point to finish, because that is all we have time for on this episode of Podcasting Essentials. Thank you, Nicole, for joining me as always.
And always a pleasure to be with you, Nick.
To find out more about how we can help you create a fantastic podcast, check out our new website at soundcartel.com.au. And don't forget to listen to our own daily podcast, Business Essentials Daily, wherever you're listening right now. From all of us at SoundCartel, thanks so much for listening.